what a pleasure to meet Gary Acosta. We connected on LinkedIn, and here's I think here's what's wonderful about Gary. What I found out already. The guy, when you talk about influencers and influencers and all that that segment that breaking out, this guy's the real deal in the Hispanic community. I know. I've been there. I've seen, and I've met many people. But what I like about Gary reaches out to people, looking for sometimes advice, information, and I like leaders that are never above reaching out, because there are some so-called leaders that never reach out. They tell you what they want to do, and it happens. And that's how Gary and I met over LinkedIn. But and now he's here. And as I mentioned to Gary right away when we started talking, I was so pleased with his chapter here. And by the way, I think their first year they were chapter of the year, rookie chapter, but amazing. And that's what Minnesota brings to the table. The energy of these young, and I say young, I think a lot of millennials and past millennials. In fact, I have to reach out now when we're talking about supporting Aguilar Productions. A young man walks into my office, and a young-looking guy, but good-looking. Us Latinos look good. We're good. And I recognized the name from the community, and he said to me, "I'm Isaac Contreras." And he had just gotten out of the Navy. And he says, and I've heard so much about you, and I want to meet you and learn from you, because I'm going to do something. I don't know what it is, and I want to do something, and I want to make it happen. So what did I say to Isaac? I said, why don't it start with you going to get us some coffee? That's what I said, man. Yeah, anyone got us the coffee. We've been together since. In fact, Isaac was at our first conferences, and he was working the room with people from our list. That's when I knew this kid's the real deal. And people loved Isaac. And through all these years that we've been friends and I've seen him grow in the business, I finally seen him in the right industry. He was in many things. But I told him, you're right where you should be. You're right where you can do all you want to do. Am I right, Isaac? Yeah. Isaac Contreras. How about a hand for Isaac? Gary Acosta is an entrepreneur, investor, and advocate for the Latino business community. He is co-founder and CEO of the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, NAREP, the largest Latino business organization in the nation, with more than 58,000 members and 100 local chapters. He is also the co-founder of Avance Global, an event platform created with media entrepreneur and New York Times best-selling author Nelly Galan. Gary also founded Avance Sports, a nonprofit dedicated to expanding Latino leadership and influence in the sports industry. He is a founding partner of Latitude Ventures, the largest venture capital fund that invests exclusively in Latino-led startups. He's the creator of the Hispanic Wealth Project, a nonprofit with a mission to advance economic mobility and generational wealth in the Latino community. His video series, The Latino Brand, shares his take on business, leadership, and image of Latinos in America. Gary attended the University of California in San Diego and Pomona College, where he played varsity basketball. for Hall of Fame coach Greg Popovich. He lives with his family in San Diego. I can't tell you how proud we are and excited to have Gary Acosta with us. Gary, come on up.
Good morning. Richard, thank you for that introduction. Pedro, that was one of the best presentations I've ever seen. Let's give him another round of applause. That was incredible. So 25 years ago, I was a mortgage broker in San Diego, California. I owned my own business, and I was trying to become more successful, to build a successful business. And I had a friend by the name of Ernie Reyes, and Ernie was a real estate broker in San Diego as well. And Ernie and I would do business together. And when we would close a transaction, we would celebrate by having a Mexican breakfast together. I usually had chorizo and eggs, and he usually had his huevos rancheros. And when we'd had those breakfasts together, we would have these really deep conversations. It wasn't just about the deal we just closed or anything like that. We would philosophize about life, and we would talk about our aspirations and our families and our dreams and so forth. And more often than not, those conversations would drift towards the Latino population community, which we were both members of, and how exciting and how much opportunity there was there, but how it was a misunderstood marketplace, especially in our space at the time, the housing space. And through a series of conversations over a number of years, Ernie and I finally asked the question, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? And I remember attending a conference in San Francisco that was all about technology in the real estate space. This was in 1999. And when I came back to San Diego after that conference, I asked Ernie to meet me in the office on a Saturday. And Ernie didn't work Saturdays, so that was kind of a big deal. And it was in that meeting that we wrote down the acronym NAHREP for the first time, and decided to launch the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. And that was an exciting moment. I remember that. But I also remember 2 or 3 weeks afterwards starting to get cold feet and started to think, what are we doing? We don't know anybody outside of San Diego. How are we going to launch a national organization? And I actually told Ernie we should probably start smaller and start with the San Diego Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals and see if it sticks. But I had a friend that was on another nonprofit board that was a national board, and he actually encouraged me against that strategy. He said there is no Latino organization representing Latinos in the real estate industry, and there should be. And you guys shouldn't hesitate to move forward with that idea. And it was great advice at the time. And then we started to file the corporate papers and get organized and really make it official. Ernie dropped another bomb on me. He said, Gary, neither one of us is really qualified to lead a national organization. We don't have the credentials. And of course, my answer was, okay, what could we do about that now? And he said, given the fact that he had a very interesting political background before he got into real estate, he said, we need somebody to endorse us, somebody who does have those credentials. And Richard, I never told you this story, but we went into a conference room and we started to write down a bunch of names. And one of the names that we wrote down was Henry Cisneros. And if you don't know who Henry is, Henry was the mayor of San Antonio and then became the first Latino HUD secretary. He was in President Clinton's cabinet. And he had just completed his term as HUD secretary when we were having this conversation. And of course we said, if Henry endorses us, then we're set, we're golden. The only problem is neither one of us knew Henry and neither one of us knew anybody who knew Henry. But as Richard pointed out, at the time he was the president of Univision in LA. And when we were about to kind of give up on the idea, I said, why don't we just write him a letter and just see if he responds? And we did, and we wrote him a letter and basically said, we're starting the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, and our mission statement is to advance Hispanic homeownership. And given your background, we would love any advice or guidance you can provide us with. And that was basically it. And to our surprise, Henry wrote us back, and he actually said, this is a fantastic idea. I wish that NARP would have existed when I was HUD secretary. We could have done a lot of cool things together. And if there is anything that I ever can do to support you, please let me know. And I remember reading that letter, and I said, did you see what he said there at the end? He said, he'll be willing to help us. And there's a phone number at the bottom of this letter. And so we decided to call the number, and we wanted to invite him to be the keynote speaker at our inaugural event, which was taking place in LA. And we got his assistant on the phone, and we said, we'd like to invite Henry to be the keynote speaker at this event. We got this letter from him, and we'd love to take him up on his offer, basically. And I'll never forget this. This is an absolute true story. His assistant said, okay, I can ask him, when is the event? It was one of those moments, like in a split second, an entire conversation takes place in your head. And the conversation that took place in my head was, I'm going to tell her the date. She's going to say, Henry is busy, and that's going to be the end of the conversation. So when she asked that question, when is the event? I just blurted out, it's whenever Henry can make it. It's a true story. And as I was saying it, I thought this must be the dumbest thing she's ever heard. But apparently it wasn't, because she just rolled with it. She says, okay, I'll ask him. And the next day she called us back and she said, Henry's available on March 1st and like June 27th. And we said, we'll take March the 1st. And we literally built the event, our inaugural event, around Henry's availability. And that was an important move for us, because it gave us that credibility that Ernie was seeking. And we ended up having a really terrific launch. And I remember that night because it was the first time we met many of the board members that we had basically recruited to be part of our board. And it was a celebration, and it was a great evening. And, there was something about the timing of that event. It was in 2000. It was March 1st of 2000. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary. And the census report, as you know, comes out every 10 years. And the scuttlebutt at that time was that the 2000 census report was going to show that Latinos, for the first time in history, had become the largest minority group in the United States, had just surpassed the African American community for the first time in terms of population. So there was a little bit of buzz out there, interest in the way of corporations and from public policy officials, elected officials, and so forth. All of a sudden, the Latino market had this sort of, kind of new energy about it. So the timing was good in that regard. And as we started to build out the organization, for a while, it seemed like we could do no wrong. The organization just kept getting bigger, our events kept getting bigger, and it seemed like it was just going to continue to be that way for a number of years. And then 2008 happened, which, if you all remember, started with the housing industry and ended up almost taking down the U.S. economy. It was probably our worst economic state since the Great Depression. And companies in our industry and in other industries were going down on a daily basis. I remember, saying that things that we said could never happen were actually happening on a daily basis. Companies like Countrywide and Washington Mutual that were staples in our industry were going out of business. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac became instruments of the federal government, taken over by the federal government. It was really a crazy time. And it was a crazy time for NARP as well, because we had really gotten, to the point that we thought we were on the other side of that hill, so to speak. And it seemed like we weren't going to make it for a while. And as bad as it was sort of felt for NAREP, it was even worse for many of our members who were losing businesses and were losing homes in many cases. And I remember kind of the low sort of point for me and for us, because I got a phone call from one of our members in Ventura, California. And she asked me if I had a contact at City Mortgage, because she had a client that was at the last stages of their foreclosure process. And they were able to rally the money together to bring the loan current amongst other family members. but they were unable to get the right person on the phone at Citibank, believe it or not. They couldn't stop the foreclosure process because they simply could not get the right people on the phone. And I asked, why? Why is that a problem? And she said, well, the father of this family was the only person on the loan, and he had recently committed suicide because of the shame and because of the devastation that they were experiencing economically. And fortunately, I did know somebody at Citi, and I was able to make that connection, and they were able to salvage the home for the family. But it was at that time that I started to realize that NAREP had to be an organization that was more about finding your next deal. It had to be about something bigger and more permanent than that. And I don't know if you remember that time, but there was a lot of data coming out, during those years. And in 2012, there was a report that came out by the Pew Studies, the Pew Institute, that suggested that Latinos had lost as much as 2/3 of their household wealth between the years 2008 and 2012. 2/3, and it wasn't high to start with. And it was disproportionate to the rest of the market. And once again, during that time, I was fortunate to have a conversation with Henry Cisneros, who remained a friend and a mentor to me throughout the organization's kind of early stages. And he had seen the same report. And it was in that conversation that we recognized that NAREP was in a unique position to provide leadership in the area of Hispanic wealth for two primary reasons. One, home equity is the primary source of wealth for most families in this country, but especially for the Latino population. And secondly, a secondary source for wealth for Latinos in particular is business ownership. And we were an organization that was all about advancing Latino home ownership, but also whose members were largely made up of small business professionals. And it was shortly after that that we decided to launch the Hispanic Wealth Project, which started to actually put reports and data about Hispanic household wealth out there in the market on a regular basis. And for the very first time, we established a goal with that initiative, and that was to triple Latino wealth, or to help triple Latino wealth over a 10-year span. And I'm happy to say that we were able, as a community, the Latino community, to achieve that goal 1 year early. So Latinos have tripled their wealth, and then some, in a 10-year span. And that really inspired me and inspired our board to kind of double down on that concept. And the Hispanic Wealth Project led to the establishment of the Latitude event platform. And if some of you know, that was a partnership with Sol Trujillo and Emilio Estefan and Oscar Munoz, who was the CEO of United Airlines not too long ago. And it became a vision for us after I attended a conference in Texas called South by Southwest. Have any of you ever heard of it? South by Southwest is an event that takes place every year that attracts over 100,000 people. And somebody said, if you want to really see what a conference can be, you should go check that out. And I did. And I was especially interested in the history of the event and who goes. And I learned that it began as a music festival. It began as a music festival to showcase the Austin, Texas live music scene. That was it. But it was so successful that the organizers started to think beyond that. They thought, well, music is really a big thing here in Austin, but so is technology. Like, we have like a mini Silicon Valley here in Austin, Texas. The rest of the country probably doesn't know about that. So let's insert technology into this conference. And we also have this burgeoning filmmaking community here, and we should showcase that. And what South by Southwest became was this celebration of Southwestern culture, which was really powerful. And I really thought that was cool. And of course, when I went, I thought, why don't we have something like that? Why don't Latinos have something that showcase the best and the brightest that we have amongst all sectors of our economy, including the media, including sports, including technology, including finance? This platform potentially can be a platform that incubates the next generation of great companies and great leaders within our community. And that was basically the genesis of the Latitude event, which took place for 7 years and was very successful. But one of the best things that Latitude produced was Latitude Ventures. Because I remember some of the content that we had at the event early on, and it was really showcasing our lack of access to capital and what a profound effect that had on us as a community in terms of building businesses and building wealth and so forth. And we decided to start something called Match Up within the event, and Match Up was the idea was let's match Latino entrepreneurs with capital and let's see if we can scale some of these companies and so forth. And of course, you know, that's great, but it kind of was like, are we doing enough? Is it happening fast enough? And Sol Trujillo and I decided to create our own fund, and we launched Latitude Ventures, which is, as Richard mentioned, the largest Latino-led venture capital fund in the country that also happens to invest exclusively in Latino-led startups. So it's kind of a big deal, and it's a great offshoot of that event. Thank you. But this whole process has been an incredible learning journey for me. And that leads me to the Latino brand, as I call it. Because one of the things that I really started to understand is how the narrative about Latinos in this country, how important that is, how significant that is with respect to career prospects, access to capital, all the things that we were really trying to advocate for as a community and as an organization. Pete mentioned a data point, which is true, and that is the United States is rapidly becoming a majority country. I think it's 2050 or sometime around that period of time, it is expected to where the non-Hispanic white community will actually become the minority and no longer be the majority in this country. But as the country becomes a more diverse nation, one thing is abundantly clear, and that is this country cannot maintain its leadership in the global economy if all segments of our communities are not thriving economically, especially the largest one, the Latino population. So this isn't just about what's good for Latinos. This is really what's good for our country. Our country cannot maintain its leadership in the global economy if Latinos are not thriving economically. We all have a stake in that success. Closing that wealth gap, or that prosperity gap, as I like to say, requires a lot of things, whether education and a number of other things. But two things that I've chosen to focus on primarily, and that is connections to capital and the Latino brand. And I'll give you some anecdotes as to why I think that's so important and why I've chosen those two things. Jeff Bezos was recently interviewed, and in that interview, he was asked, why is it that I don't know how many trillion-dollar companies there are public on the stock exchange today, but why is it that the United States, basically, is the destination where all these companies exist? How is it that all these great companies tend to be started here in the United States? And Bezos said, it's because of our very unique venture capital system. Bezos says, you can have a great idea for a company, and you could raise $50 million for that company, and the investors know that that company only has a 1 in 10 chance of succeeding. There's nowhere else in the world where that's common, right? But here, that system. Now, I want you to think about that and hold that thought for a second. When we were just launching Latitude, and I was kind of doing a listening tour and going to different markets and meeting people who were giving us advice, and I was kind of sharing the vision and trying to drum up interest in what we were doing, I went to New York City and I had this luncheon. Invited some very influential Latinos from the New York market, and I was talking to them about what the ethos was of Latitude and what we were trying to accomplish. And when I got to the area of access to capital, a very smart guy by the name of Angel Morales, who used to run private equity for Merrill Lynch and now has his own family office, so this is a successful guy, he tells me, you gotta stop using the phrase access to capital. And you gotta start using the phrase connection to capital. And I said, what's the difference? He says, I'll tell you the difference. He says, tomorrow, some 27-year-old white kid is gonna raise $10 million for an idea he has for an app. And that doesn't happen because he has access. That happens because he has connections. And that just was a really interesting change in nomenclature that sort of, I think, influenced me even further. Those connections to capital are so critical. They don't show up necessarily on the radar screen, but they are fundamental to what this country was built on. So when I got the chance to participate in raising capital for Latitude Ventures, I also learned a lot through that process. One of the things that I learned, and I got to see firsthand, is what people with real capital actually think about Latinos when it comes to business. And we weren't asking for a $5,000 check for our gala. We were asking for $10 million worth of investment capital. And that's a whole different ballgame. And when I was going through that process, I learned a couple things. One, even though we're 19% of the US population and almost 25% of the millennial population, we get less than 1% of that venture capital, less than 1%. I also learned that there's roughly $72 trillion of capital floating around the globe, of investment capital. And a relatively small number of people control that capital. And I started to ask myself, why would those people who have a lot of pressure on them to get a return on that investment, why would those people want to invest in a community that's full of problems? See, if the narrative about the Latino community is that we're a community that's full of immigration problems and full of money problems and full of problems with the law, we shouldn't be surprised that accessing capital has been next to impossible for us. That narrative matters. Conversely, let me kind of give you the flip side of that. When the narrative is positive, what could happen? The Indian community in this country, I don't know if there's many the large Indian population here in Minneapolis. Well, the Indian population is less than 1% of the US population. India from India, yeah. Google, IBM, Twitter, PepsiCo, Microsoft, they all have Indian CEOs. Now, is it possible that Indians are just better at running businesses and there are literally no Latinos capable of running a business like that? Or is it more likely that a narrative has emerged inside the C-suites and boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies that Indians are pretty good at running big companies? I mean, I don't want to take anything away from those CEOs who have done a great job, but come on, Latinos are great too, right? Whether we want to believe it or not, we all have a stake in that brand, in the reputation, in the narrative about Latinos. We can work really hard, and nobody questions our work ethic. It's not because of that. We can get better educated, but if we don't control our own narrative, it's gonna have an impact on our career paths. It's gonna have an impact towards our access to capital. It's gonna have an impact on how our children are treated in their schools. So my plea to all of you is, if you have an opportunity to invest in one of our businesses, you should do it. If you have the opportunity to make a contribution to one of our political campaigns, you should do it. And here's the hard part. And if anybody, and I don't care who that is, speaks ill of our community, we have to hold them accountable. We need to call them out like other communities do, like the Jewish community does. We have to have that kind of vigilance around our brand. Because if we do that, then I think nothing is out of our reach as a community. I think that's our call to action. For those of us that are leaders of the Latino community in different formats and different capacities, disseminating that message, that unity message, is critical. One of Richard's favorite presidents, Ronald Reagan, he said something many years ago that became known as the 11th commandment of Republican politics. And that was, thou shalt not speak ill of thy fellow Republicans. I actually wrote a blog once that was titled, thou shalt not publicly criticize other Latinos. And I got a lot of criticism for that blog. Like, what? What are you talking about? Latinos can screw up too? Absolutely. But you know what? We should assume the best of each other first. We should have each other's back. That is the one thing that I think has eluded us historically. And that's why I've dedicated myself and my podcast to the Latino brand. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. I can stand right here.
Well, am I on, Rico? Where's Rico? Hi, Rico. Steve? Hi. Hello. Thank you.
There we go.
What amazing words from Gary. We waited so
Richard.
long.
Thank you.
And what the remarks from Gary really talk directly to a lot of our issues nationally. You know, last night at dinner I was telling Gary that the key for us now that we have to concentrate, and it's also the key to wealth, is our children's education. Latino kids, man, we're getting killed out there, folks. Never believe any of the media. We're doing terrible. A good friend of mine here that I just saw here, and she's a good, great friend, my friend Carmen Robles, and I have been working with these kids for 30 years. And they're, Carmen Robles, what an amazing woman. And you know what? These kids are scared. And if we're going to look for anything with leaders like Gary, we have to look at the education. And I was telling Gary something, my thought, and then I want you to respond to it, Gary. There's a plan for us, for the Latino community, because we keep on welcoming that plan. And how do we welcome that? They'll say, well, let the Latinos in. They'll do the work nobody else wants to do. Remember that. And these are advocates, so-called advocates, Gary, of our community on the border situation. Let them in. They'll do the work that nobody else wants to do. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the master plan. Because if you don't think corporate America and the restaurant industry and the construction industry, all these industries that need bodies, they've given up on other groups because they don't work as hard as we do. They've given up trying to recruit them. They don't show up, these other groups. But we show up. There's a plan. And you know, Gary, as much as you and I have met corporate people, I think they mean well, because for them, that means they're giving us opportunity to work. And some of those jobs are well paid. Gary, let's talk about that now. That these advocates, and you said it well about about looking at different acronyms and how these
Yeah.
different groups. I think it's important to get back to that because we can't listen to everybody and try to realize that that's part of the plan. Give us a little bit of your thought on that about the future of our children could be working in those industries the rest of their lives. And it's not bad, but that's not our destiny, is it?
That is not
That
our
can't be
destiny.
our destiny.
No. Let me just comment on a couple things. First, let me stay on the kids.
Oh,
sort of
sure.
thing. So I completely agree with that. One thing I didn't mention was that we are rebranding our event Proximo this year, next. And one of the tracks that we have for the event this year is for the adult children of attendees, an actual educational track, and there'll actually be social events. And I'll tell you what inspired us to do that. Every year, the Jewish community, especially those in the Northeast, send their kids to summer camp, the Catskills. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Sure. And they learn about their culture at those events. They have some fun, but most importantly, the real purpose is to connect them to each other. So they can find their future business partners, they can find friends for life, and they can maybe even find future spouses. Because they want to preserve that culture and that sense of community. It's big to them, and it's worked. We've never had anything like that. So we're really excited about actually incorporating that into our event for the very first time. The one thing Latinos are really good at is family, right? It's one of the reasons why Latinos are so passionate about home ownership, because the home is the center of the family experience. So that data point that Pete mentioned, that 70%, and this isn't our numbers, this came from the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C., 70% of net new homeowners over the next 20 years will be Latino, nationwide. Mm-hmm. So you are at the right place at the right time. But yeah, I think that sometimes we talk about controlling our narrative, right? And this whole sort of what I call this war on DEI and so forth. That wasn't our term. DEI wasn't our term, right? We didn't come up with that term. That term was imposed on us, basically. And I think that term actually ended up being part of the problem because it sort of, I think, put us in a particular bucket. And it made it easy for people to be able to interpret what that acronym means, however they choose. So those that were supportive of the ethos of it meant one thing. It meant one thing to them. Those that were more basically skeptical of what it represented could basically define it however they chose. We have to control that narrative at the end of the day. I think for the most part, and there are exceptions, but for the most part, reasonable people in this country support the concept of a level playing field where the best does have the opportunity to rise to the top because we know that's what's best for this country at the end of the day. We want the best and the brightest in the positions of influence and in decision-making roles in this country, right? And one of the ways we do that is by closing relationship gaps. I talked about the importance of those connections and how critical that is. And also, just providing opportunities for people who have historically not had them. Not so that we can lower the bar and give people jobs that they're not qualified for, but so that we can level the playing field so the best can rise to the top.
Well, thank you for those words, Gary. And in closing, 25 years, an anniversary. When people look at anniversaries, they, well, congratulations, and man, it must have been amazing. The trials and tribulations of starting an organization. And in our history, I would venture to say this. In our history of organizations in the Latino community, the LULACs, the GI Forum, the many local chambers, the TAMACs in Texas, and the groups, but to make it a national effort, Hector Barreto, a restaurant owner in Kansas City, Missouri, had a vision back in the 80s. Hector wanted to start a national business, a national chamber of commerce, a Hispanic chamber. And everybody said, well, we already have our chamber. You know us Latinos, man, we're going to guard our territory. Yeah, you want what? No. So Hector had this vision. And at the same time, we were starting our chamber here in Minnesota in 1980. We were starting our chamber. And we were launching our chamber, and somehow Sandy Vargas, we all know Sandy, past chair of the Minneapolis Foundation, very successful, Gary. She said, well, this was before the internet. He said, well, there's a Latino in Kansas City starting the National Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I said, well, who is it? Hector Barreto. So somehow it could have been horseback or smoke waves or whatever. We got a hold of Hector. And we bring him, we're going to launch the chamber at St. Thomas University. Perfect match for us Catholics. They love Latinos. We're going to be in the business world. And we get Hector, we pick him up at the airport. Well, the guy doesn't speak English. We're going to have 3M there, General Mills, everybody else. He doesn't speak English. And I'm sitting there, man. And you know what? My English isn't that. I'm not fluent. I'll put it that way. Anyway, we took Hector to lunch. You know, within that half hour, I felt this man. I felt, it's the same with Gary. You feel that energy. You feel the commitment. I felt that with Hector Barreto. And he delivered. And so in the history of our country, two organizations that have to do with business, that have to do with important industries, have been successful. NOPREP is one of them. How about a hand for Gary? And we have you know Aguilar Productions. We love giving awards, and over the years, how many people have gotten one of our La Familia awards here? Let's a show of hands. Yeah, our La Familia award. Well, of course, because awards are important. There are Gary, there's so many people that do good work and never get recognized.
That's right.
But they don't care. They don't care because they go home and they get up in the morning and their heart's full, and they say, we did it. But Rick Aguilar cared, and we've honored so many different people. It's like a lost and found thing. We'll find you. And so I'm going to ask Julissa, our current chair, can you come up here just and help us? How about our president of NAREP? Yeah, you can stand right over here, Julissa. I'm gonna read this. This is our La Familia Hispanic Heritage Award. And this is our 22nd year of having this happen during Hispanic Heritage Month. But obviously, Gary's busy. We can't book him twice. Can we, Gary? No, I don't think so. But so we're going to give this award to NAREP. And it's really one of the recipients was Daddy Vargas, who is working with the museum, National Museum. He was good. So here's the award, Gary. In recognition of the 25th anniversary of the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, also bringing the voice of Hispanic real estate and a champion of home ownership for the community. Therefore, with the appreciation and respect of the Hispanic community in Minnesota, this commendation is presented to NAREP. Pride and respect for Hispanic heritage, culture, and community. Congratulations.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate that. Thank
you. Give us a few.
Thank you. Yeah, 25 years. Who would have known? This journey has been extraordinary. I think Richard and I were talking a little bit over dinner about the fact that people think it's just this smooth road upward, and it's not like that. And those of you who own businesses and started businesses, you know that it's really the resilience of that, and it comes down to a few principles. And if you adhere to those principles and stick to those principles, and you've got a great message, then you have a chance. You have a real chance. One of the principles that we have that we don't talk about publicly, but I think it's relevant to the conversations that we've had here today, and that is there's no drama at NAREP. This is a principle that we have and we share with our staff all the time. And sometimes when you're starting an organization, especially a national organization, you've got a lot of people and they're from different markets and different backgrounds. The hardest part is keeping people together. And there's fiefdoms and there's conflict and there's competition, especially in our industry, that can challenge what the organization is really all about. So we were very committed to that ethos, right? And what it does at the end of the day is you tend to attract people who subscribe to that mindset. And you also tend to repel the people who don't. And over time, you end up with people who share. They're not all the same, but they have a similar alignment and they have similar values. And when you have that, you can really do something special. So thank you very much, Richard.
Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you very much. And
our chapter here is amazing, by the way.
amazing chapter.
Amazing chapter.
Yeah. Well, we want to, how about another hand, Gary Acosta, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah. And, as we wrap up our program, we want to thank everyone, our sponsors again, U.S. Bank. Myra's here, I think one of our reps from the bank. There are others are all making loans and doing their work. And, of course, the Latino Chamber of Commerce, Johnny Pacheco, Anita Grace doing amazing work. We'll be at your events. And, of course, NAREP, Twin Cities, my favorite group. So as we leave this conference, we look into the future. Our next event is La Familia. It'll be September 25th. And we're moving the event to this venue here. And we'll be honoring some special people. My word as we leave today, what an amazing day, and what an amazing audience. No, really. Yeah. Nobody was out making phone calls and checking in and, calling the guy and he's cutting the lawn. No, we were all paying attention here, and that's the way it should be, and especially when you're interested. So I leave you with this. Hispanic marketing, so important. Support that industry. Be part of the industry. And we look forward to continued success with NAREP, your upcoming Proximo event, Gary. And on behalf of Aguilar Productions, we'll be back next year to celebrate our 30th anniversary. Yeah. And I already hired our caterer, Obligados, for the next 5 years. So, we're not going away, folks. So on behalf of all of us, thank you for a great day, and we'll see you soon. God bless.